So obviously, in sports entertainment marketing one, we looked at issues in every industry. We looked at issues in football with concussions and with political instruments and things like that. We looked at the NBA and we looked at their political stances on things. We looked at how players have the power now in the league and just some of the different issues that are coming up within those particular leagues. Video games are certainly right there. They certainly have issues too, and it's one of those things where they are attempting to figure out how do they address some of these issues. The term we'll look at for this section will be ethical issues. And ethical issues is in businesses a situation where moral conflict arises and must be addressed. In other words, it is an occasion where a moral standard is questioned. And so, like all of these issues that we're going to look at today on video games, are things where the video game makers are trying to figure out ways so that you can keep playing your game happily and not and that they won't be in some sort of limbo there, like putting ratings on the video games or helping parents know how much screen time their child has had, or all of the things that, because video games by nature are very addictive and they're quite engaging and they're a lot of fun, and so those are all certainly things that the video game manufacturers are trying to figure out. In looking at video games and some of the concerns that we have in video games, I came across this article here from Canada's Centre for Digital Media Literacy, and talked about the video game sector as the fastest growing entertainment industry and second only to music in profitability. Global sales of video game software hit almost 17 billion in 2011. And this article is a little bit outdated, so there has been some changes in that. But I think these concerns are ones that we are still thinking about. Up here are certainly ones where we've heard a lot about, and I know the video game industry is trying to figure that out in order to kind of fix some of the concerns that parents have. For me, as a parent. So when it comes to fanboys in the movie world, you have Star Wars fans, and they are probably the most notorious for being loud and obnoxious, and Princess Leia or Rey wasn't the right granddaughter of so and so or whatever. Is there a group of fanboys on a particular game in the gaming culture now that maybe are as ardent about their passion for that particular game?
Yes. Funny you mentioned that. Although I don't include myself in these toxic fanboys, there is a series, we'll just call it the Dark Souls series, basically. The Dark Souls series has some of the most intense, passionate fans, which I am one. I am a very intense, passionate fan of From Software, the company that makes these Dark Souls games. They're absolutely brilliant masterclasses of game design. But there are some people who hold these games as like, near religious experiences, and basically anyone who wants to change it, or they're just super harshly critical of any games that try to copy that formula but don't live up to it. And there's a number of people in that community, in the Dark Souls community, who can be very exclusionary. One of kind of the big, I guess, mechanics, if you will, of like Dark Souls games is there's no difficulty setting. They craft the game how they want you to play it, and it's very challenging. And if you can't beat it, there are a number of people in the community that just, tell you need to get good and figure it out, and are intentionally unhelpful and stuff like that. But maybe I'm biased, but I don't think I am one of those people. In fact, I try to get as many people to see these games for what they are. So I get what the Dark Souls fanboys are. Yeah, I get their intention. We'll just say they don't go about it in the best way.
Right, quite a bit. Number one, the first major concern here we'll be looking at today will be excessive playing, the amount of just time that we spend online, and these video games where kids are 16 hours a day or whatever playing games. Is there problems to that? What kind of long-term problems does that affect from a mental and a physical health standpoint?
Video games are awesome. Everyone knows that. But what the heck happens to your puny body when you play an excessive amount of them? There are cases from all over the world of gamers playing too much for too long and not surviving to actually reach the end credits. But despite a few tragic tales of gaming gone wrong, video games aren't all bad. There are plenty of ways that video games can actually make you a better person, and a few ways that they can turn you into a useless husk of a human. So let's dig into the good, the bad, and the ugly of going into the deep end of video gaming. Bloodborne. Marathon gaming sessions aren't uncommon, but all of those all-night kill streaks might be endangering your life. A condition called deep vein thrombosis can result from frequently sitting still for too long. One British gamer died of blood clots formed by a lifestyle of frequent 12-hour gaming sessions, and he's not the only gamer that's damaged their circulation system by prolonged immobility. Deep vein thrombosis, sometimes known as economy class syndrome, typically affects travelers of extremely long-haul flights, since there's nowhere to move around, and involves the formation of blood clots due to extended periods of sitting in one place. Your body needs to move, so don't be afraid to hit pause or skip a match. You have the rest of your life to get fragged, but this isn't the only reason to get up while you get your game on. Fat Princess. For a while, motion gaming platforms like Nintendo Wii and PlayStation Move were starting to push the boundaries as far as what it meant to play a video game. But for the most part, gaming is still defined by kicking back on the couch and pushing buttons. Turns out that sitting around for hours on end with minimal movement can make you fat. Who knew? Studies have shown largely mixed results. Some say that active video games don't really have a negative effect on your body, as long as you keep your hands off the snacks while you're sitting there. Other studies have found that those who play video games a lot are more likely to gain weight. No matter what, playing button mashers is not a net positive for your bod. The best approach? Try to mix in a little exercise and healthy snacks every few levels. Nintendonitis. Even if you keep your body active between gaming sessions, the repetition of using a controller for weeks on end can still take a toll. Gaming typically requires a lot of repetitive hand motions, and tons of players have developed repetitive stress injuries thanks to gaming. The condition happens when you repeatedly do the same motion over and over, and typically affects the wrists and hands, but can move up to the forearms and elbows depending on the person and the playing style. You're not even safe if you're famous or using a non-traditional controller. Injury-prone MLB pitcher Joel Zumaya was sidelined by playing Guitar Hero 2 a little too hard and messing up his wrist. In other words, put the controller down sometimes. Brain drain. If you play video games enough, they can start to mess with your mind, literally. A 2011 study published in Translational Psychiatry surveyed brain scans of 154 14-year-old children who played more than 9 hours of video games each week. Hardcore gamers had much larger reward centers in their brains than the average kid, which prompted the desire to play even more video games. And if you're prone to seizures, you need to be very careful with your gaming sessions. A report published by the National Institutes of Health in 1994 noted a study in which the majority of patients with epileptic seizures suffered from photosensitivity while playing video games. For 27 of the 35 seizure patients studied, their first seizure came while playing video games. Since 1994, however, there have been standards put in place to prevent unnecessary photostimulation in video games. That doesn't mean that every game publisher follows those rules, however, so proceed with caution. Of course, it's not all bad news. Let's talk a little bit about mind powers. According to a 2013 study at the Max Planck Institute, areas in the brain responsible for spatial navigation, memory formation, and strategic planning could all be positively impacted by video games. Looking beyond just those perks, the study noted that there could be great potential in using video games as a form of therapy for patients who suffer from mental disorders, ranging from Alzheimer's to schizophrenia. And when it comes to getting your hands to match your brain, there's more good news. You usually have to be fast to be a good gamer, and not surprisingly, those skills can translate beyond video games. In 2014, Tech Times reported on a study that found playing action video games helped gamers learn new motor skills, as well as develop their eye and hand coordination. Career-wise, the report notes those abilities can come in handy if you want to be a surgeon. So remember that the next time you're flying through Halo, you're also prepping for med school. Can't get enough. Douglas Gentile, a psychologist at Iowa State University, has been tracking video game players for decades. According to his findings, about 9% of kids who play video games are addicted. So what's the cause of the video game addiction? Gentile broke it down to what he calls the ABCs. The A is autonomy. We like to feel we're in control. B is belonging. We like to feel connected to other people. And C is competence. We like to feel that we're good at what we do. Psychologist Mark Griffiths, director of the International Gaming Research Unit at Nottingham Trent University, added that the addiction can also be related to the constant rewards built into video games, from hitting high scores to merely the sense of accomplishment. Those game achievements you're striving for, they're totally playing you, bro. Social network. The sweaty loner sitting in his room playing video games in the dark is an old cliche, and these days, it's actually an outdated one. Online gaming has managed to connect people in ways we never could have dreamed of decades ago, and it's actually helping potential solitary players find new friends. According to a 2013 report by the American Psychological Association, more than 70% of gamers play with at least one friend, and millions of people have joined virtual worlds through social games, from Farmville to World of Warcraft. These types of games encourage cooperation and teamwork, and considering the typical Warcraft player logs more than 22 hours per week online, it stands to reason that most players would find a camaraderie there. Along with virtual friends, video games are also popular among real-life pals to throw down online. And that's pretty undeniably awesome.
You know what you guys should do? Try being around other humans every once in a while, because humans don't hug like this.
Another problem that we see is violence. Obviously you've got some, video games where you have you put ratings on them and you've tried to, find ways to control that. But on the other hand, I just showed you a video before from Doom, and that was in middle of the 90s game, and it's very violent with blood and all of that stuff. But it is one of those things where people are concerned, how does that affect people in the real world? Like, does someone become more hyper violent if they watch video games and all of that? So some interesting things to think about.
In our morning rounds, video games and your kids, 97% of teenagers and preteens say they play them. About a third admit at least one of their favorites is rated mature or adults only, often because of the violent content. Well, a new study finds a link between violent games and aggressive behavior in children. Dr. Harold Koplowitz is a child psychiatrist and president of the Child Mind Institute and joins us at the table. Hello, Harold Koplowitz.
Good morning.
Seems like we have been hearing about this information for years, that there's a correlation. What makes this study different and so important to you?
I think it's a very good study in the respect it's a large sample. There are over 3,000 kids who were interviewed for the study over 2 years, and they were interviewed 3 times about how often they play games, what kind of games they're playing, and what kind of effect it has on them. It has one limitation that we should note is that they only are relying on self-report. That means the kids are giving us the information. We're not getting information from teachers or from parents. But the kids are telling us that the longer they play and the more they play aggressive games, they start thinking in an aggressive way and they have more aggressive attitudes. That's not necessarily a link to violence, but that does tell us that the exposure, particularly for young kids, does have a negative effect in the way they think.
Any difference in boys and girls?
Surprisingly not. And that's the other nice part about this sample, is that it's girls and boys, ranging from 8 years to 17 years of age. And girls are just as sensitive to this as boys are.
But what's the difference between watching violent movies? I mean, we have so much violence on television now. How is that any different than playing a violent video game?
I think there's a very big difference. It's almost a virtual reality kind of experience. And it's very different than when my kids were playing games. I mean, my kids are 25 to 30. And if you remember, like Pac-Man, bing, bing, you get so bored so quickly. But today, it's a very engaging, interactive experience. And that's what we have to be concerned about, because you're exposing kids to potentially very inappropriate material and also very aggressive material. I can tell you that recently someone asked me I asked someone about their 13-year-old son for their birthday, what I should get, and the mother said, buy this video, Grand Theft Auto. And I said, okay, and then I went online, and when I saw the content, I thought, well, I'm allegedly a top child psychiatrist, and I'm not going to give them a videotape about prostitution, which really speaks to the fact that parents have to really be more involved. They have to monitor, they have to understand how much time they're doing it, and if they don't know what the video is, they should go to the store and ask them to show it to them.
And you're not surprised by this, but the Entertainment Software Association gave us this response, quote, "There is simply no concrete evidence that video games cause harm. Scores of independent medical authorities and scientific experts have found repeatedly that there is no connection between video games and real-life violence."
And that's the key, Charlie. We're not talking about violence here. We're talking about aggressive thinking and aggressive attitudes. We can't make the jump.
We have to wrap it up. I'm so sorry. It's such an interesting topic.
There is any link between violence on the screen and real violence. With Ben Shapiro, editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, and retired Army Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, who's authored books on the psychology of violence. Ben Shapiro, I know you're skeptical about a link from video games. Yeah. Millions and millions of people play these video games. I mean, girls aren't as into these video games, I'm sorry, as boys are, but I think if my sons had access to them, I'm sure they'd play them all the time, because something about the boy's brain and these games. But why are you not worried about it?
Well, I mean, I'm not supremely worried about it just because the consumption of these violent video games has been going up continuously since the early 90s, and yet youth violence has been going down since the early 90s. The correlation actually doesn't fit. As far as individual instances, I mean, you can find patterns in very sporadic instances among virtually all data sets, but there's some pretty mixed data about this. It's true that the American Psychological Association recommends that parents not allow their kids to play these games. I wouldn't let my kids play these games because I think they're immoral, frankly, but that should really be up to parents. I'm not sure the government should be in the business of stepping in. In 2011, Justice Scalia, in a majority decision 5-4, found that it was actually unconstitutional for the state of California to regulate the capacity of parents to be able to get these video games for their kids, or even for kids to get them themselves without parental permission. You saw that as a content violation under the First Amendment.
Gender stereotyping, there has been some concern about women being treated a certain way online, both from the player standpoint and from video games, hyping up sexuality in the characters, like Lara Croft and different ones where they're seen as sexual icons first and video game characters second. And, there have just been a number of games over the years that have done that. That's not anything new. I remember there was a off-road 4x4 game that we used to play where at arcades, and the women that were waving the flags to start the race were not dressed appropriately according to my mom. So I think that's been around for a while now.
I do think it's also a dangerous place as well. I mean, we've talked to all of our kids, of course, about, being safe on the internet, not talking to strangers like we don't talk to strangers in real life and whatnot. But it is interesting. I think it's hard to tell where the world is going to be 10 years from now. But if you go to certain chat rooms in some video games, you will be very, very concerned. Where if you go to other chat rooms in other games, it's kind of like, oh, maybe the world's going to be all right.
Right. Is it concerning about the maybe the addictive nature of video games, and that's my place I go see my friends, and so it gives maybe an excuse to play for 16 hours a day or whatever? I mean, that's got to be harmful on somebody to play that long.
Absolutely. I mean, beyond just, of course, the physical strain of eye strain, carpal tunnel, and everything else, it's also just not healthy to be sitting that long, to be sedentary for that long. I mean, when I was growing up, my parents literally had an egg timer, and they're like, this is your time. This is all you get. And for me, that was devastating for a long time because all I wanted to do was go back and play more. But at the same time, I can totally respect their choice in that because I probably would have just played ad nauseum if I had the choice as a child. Right. So it is definitely something that we have to respect boundaries for and create boundaries for ourselves if no one else is doing it for us.
Yeah. Oh, you guys are mean.
I didn't think it was a real girl, a real ugly girl.
I thought it was some random ass creepy ass dude. Turns out it's some random ass creepy ass bitch.
Okay.
You hate the cutie pie. How about would you be okay with like an e-date, going on an e-date with me? You could like video chat. I could order you some Uber Eats.
I don't like broke dudes. Sorry.
I just offered to order you Uber Eats, you dumb bitch.
I'm good.
That makes me not broke.
You say you don't like broke dudes. Like, are you even remote attracted?
Let me see that skin real quick though. Wait, this shit's fire.
You do have to be pretty hot to say you don't like broke dudes, to be honest.
I got money, so it makes no difference to me, but I don't think bitches should be saying that unless they're remotely attracted.
Stepsis, can you answer our questions, baby? I'm getting real lonely over here, and I heard your cute little voice. So I'm just considering maybe possibly we could continue this relationship through like Skype or Discord or something,
And finally, racial stereotyping. Looking at the ways we look at different races, and very few, like this says, very few were Hispanic, fewer than 11% were African American, and so we are trying to figure that out as well. That's probably a concern that I haven't heard a lot lately, and not that that's not one to think about, but these three up here are certainly ones where we've heard a lot about, and I know the video game industry is trying to figure that out in order to kind of fix some of the concerns that parents have. For me, as a parent,
their bubble is limited. Couple this with negative portrayals of underrepresented groups in media, this can lead to racist thoughts, stereotypes, and gross misconceptions. Exposure and representation matter to combat these issues. I would like to point out some notable games that have made meaningful attempts to portray underrepresented groups. But let me preface by saying that throwing in a character from a marginalized group simply for the purpose of checking a box is equally as disrespectful as leaving them out entirely. especially when the inclusion of these characters are fake, not fully developed, or their identity is defined by this singular trait, be it sexual identity, race, or other. Some noteworthy instances of diversity and representation come in the form of Last of Us Part 2, which features a lesbian protagonist by the name of Ellie, and even a supporting character who plays a pivotal role in the story who happens to be transgender, who goes by the name of Lev. Last of Us Part 2 does not stop there, but also portrays Abby as a physically strong and muscular woman, as opposed to an overly sexualized representation, as is so often used to portray women in games. Prey and Infamous both feature Native American protagonists. Miles Morales is Black and Latino. The latest Avengers game features Kamala Khan as Miss Marvel, who is Pakistani American, gaming's first Muslim lead. We have even seen representation in the realm of individuals who struggle with mental health, as was so masterfully portrayed with Senua, the female lead of Hellblade. This celebration of humanity is not limited to gaming, but has penetrated all forms of art. One notable example outside of gaming that I think is worth mentioning is Marvel's The Black Panther, a film with nearly an entirely black cast, a celebration of blackness. Young African American boys and girls were able to witness a strong, thriving country led by black individuals, kings, queens, soldiers, scientists, and intellectuals. This film portrays black women as strong, independent, fierce warriors. The women in the film have darker complexions, short hair, or no hair at all, features that have been used historically to degrade women of color. Yet this film teaches a generation of young black girls that they are strong and beautiful. Representation and diversity in gaming, as well as all forms of entertainment, matter. Art can change the world. Let's continue to walk down this path so the world can be a better place. I am so grateful and overjoyed that you are here with me for my first video. If you enjoyed this content, please share and subscribe and comment down below with your thoughts. You are witnessing the beginning of what I suspect will be a beautiful journey. Always remember, with great power comes great responsibility.